Welcome to the certification program. My name is Shadow Farrell, and I'm going to be your instructor. Yes, Shadow is my real name. There's always students that ask me that. I just go by Shad. Some people can't handle that. They call me Chad the whole course, but I do not respond to Shag, Shack, or Shade. So it has to be a four-letter name that ends in HAD for me to know that you're talking to me. Now, I know you're not in a classroom. You can't raise your hand and talk to me, but I feel like you're a real student, that we're going to be in a classroom together and go on this journey. And I certainly, as I was creating the courses, felt like I had a lot of bonding with you. For my background, I've been a trainer for over 25 years. I started my career teaching DOS 622, Windows 3.1, if anybody even remembers those operating systems. And I've taught every generation of Microsoft operating systems since then, through Windows XP, into Windows 10, Windows 11, all the versions of Server. I've done other operating systems as well. I mostly specialized in Microsoft products and networking for most of my career, although I've done classes in programming as well. And in the last decade or so, it's been really an emphasis on cybersecurity, ethical hacking, things like that. I do have practical expertise in the field. So companies that I've worked for that you might recognize, I was a supervisor of network services at American International Group, AIG. They're a Fortune 20 insurance company. I actually ran the network at the home office where the chairman sat. This was a great job if you ever want to be 26 and have a huge ego. It was in the sixth tallest building in Manhattan, 66 floors. And we had a catwalk over to 72 Wall Street next to the stock exchange. I also worked for Johnson & Johnson, a big pharmaceutical company. So where I know that things work a little bit differently in real life than they work in theory, I'll try to share that information with you. I have a lot of experience designing curriculum and managing training schools. I was a regional manager for computertraining.com, and I have a Master of Fine Arts in writing, which is a terminal degree. It's like the equivalent of a doctorate, but you don't get to be called doctor, which is kind of a bummer. But I have a lot of experience in adult learning. I've spent a lot of my career learning about and watching how people learn and trying to optimize my lectures so that people can understand really difficult concepts as quickly and easily as possible. So technical training involves theory and hands-on. We have different types of learning styles. Some people are primarily visual learners. They like to learn by seeing. Well, we've got videos, we've got pictures and diagrams. Some people are auditory learners. Like I'm primarily an auditory learner. I hate video. So we have transcripts of videos, we have reading. Almost everybody, particularly people that are interested in IT, are kinesthetic learners, meaning they learn by doing. And so where it's appropriate, we've provided great labs. I've really tried to design labs that give you a feel for how things work, why they work that way. This has been such a nice experience to have full control over the labs and be able to make the best possible experience for you, the student. Where possible, I try to give definitions with analogies to real life. I feel like I'm kind of scarred by third grade. In third grade, the instructor would say, write the definition of this word. And you can't use the word in a definition that's not a definition. And somehow, for me, that became, don't use a technical word in a technical definition, because then you're kind of building on shaky ground. So I try to get things down to the most basic definitions, something you can take to the bank. This is how it works. And to make analogies to real life, because there's a lot of stuff in technology that works very similar to how the same type of thing works among human beings. And I think anytime we can leverage what you know from your real life, that's great. The mind sort of works like Legos, those blocks that you use to build things. So what I try to do in courses is put down a nice Lego platform and then carefully build one block upon the next so that everything clicks into place. So I'm really excited to be your instructor. This is a great opportunity for both of us. I want you to know that once my student, always my student. I think you're going to do fantastic, and I am very interested in your success. I'm going to do everything I possibly can do to help you be successful. So I can't wait to see you inside the track, and I hope you have a wonderful time learning in this program with me. In this certification, there are going to be 6 courses. So you're going to go through operating systems, networking, security, databases, web applications, and programming. All of the courses are designed very similarly. So there'll be modules that cover different topics. Within the modules will be different lessons. At the end of each lesson, you have a practice assessment so you can test what you've learned, make sure you've grasped the main concepts. At the end of each module will be a module review and a graded assessment. The last module in each course is going to be a capstone assignment. Capstones all revolve around a fictitious scenario, and they allow you to integrate your knowledge into a real-world problem. I think you're going to enjoy the courses. It really hits all these main ideas that you would see in technology, gives you a little bit of exposure to everything, and I think it's going to nicely prepare you for the rest of your career. I hope you enjoy the course, and I can't wait to see you inside. Before you get started, I want to share with you some advice for completing this certification. You've got 6 courses. I would take some time and map out how you plan to finish this in the time you've allotted for yourself. There are different numbers of modules in each course. Not every module takes a week to complete. And so if you kind of get an idea before you start how long you're going to take, the recommended time is about 6 months. Sort of plan that out. Pay attention to what you need to complete. You know, at the end of each module, there's a graded assessment coming. And at the end of each course, there's a capstone module that's coming. After you see the first capstone module, you'll have a better idea of what the capstones entail. Maybe you can plan a little bit better. These are technology courses. So there's going to be a lot of vocabulary in these particular courses. And I like to tell my students, you get paid according to your gratuitous vocabulary. So if you go to the doctor and he's like, dude, you busted your hand, you're like, I think I want another doctor. He says, Mr. Farrell, you have a fracture of the metatarsal. Ooh, I like that. I don't know what he said. They actually both said the same thing, I think. But the person with vocabulary seems more like the professional. There's going to be tons of vocabulary. For the most part, in technology, we tend to use acronyms. So I would pay a little bit more attention to the acronyms. Like, do you need to know that DHCP is the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol? Probably not. What you need to know about it is it's used to give out IP addresses. So as you're studying vocabulary, I would start with the acronym, and you'll be able to pick up if we focus more on the acronym or what it means, and then come up with succinct definitions that tell you what it does. Sometimes I'll ask students, what does DHCP do? And they're like, oh, that's the centralized mechanism for... That's too many words. I can't remember that. If I know it gives out IP addresses, oh, that's simple. I can remember that. So try to keep your definitions short and sweet. What does this do? What is important about this topic that I'm learning? When possible, I want to encourage you to be sarcastic. I always love to joke with students. I say, if you didn't come into my class sarcastic, I'm going to make sure you leave that way. And let me explain what I mean by sarcastic. So in the early 90s, late 80s, there was a movie called Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Keanu Reeves and another actor, I can never remember his name, played these sort of 2 brain-dead surfer dudes. And there's a great scene at the beginning of the movie where the camera focuses in on their history professor. And the history professor is saying something like, well, let me make sure I understand you. You're telling me that Caesar is a dead salad dressing dude. And then it pans to one of the actors and they're like, yeah, right? So you can kind of imagine Bill and Ted take a technology class. And I say to them, Ted, what do backup operators do? And they go, dude, they operate the backup. But that's actually the right answer. I mean, in technology, usually if you take the last word, the last couple of words, you move it to the beginning, that's what it is. So backup operators operate the backup. That's correct. Anywhere you can use the sarcastic answer to figure out what something is, then that's vocabulary you don't need to memorize, right? If a business continuity plan is a plan for the continuity of the business, which is what it is, then you don't need to memorize that. If media access control is controlling access to the media or medium, there's nothing to memorize. So don't be afraid to just apply basic logic to it. Sometimes you're going to see words that you might not be familiar with. You can try and look them up on the internet, but you want to be a little bit wary. I'm going to give you the technology definitions. Sometimes the definitions you might find on Google are great for that word just in general. And it might have some input into what the word means in technology. Sometimes there are words that mean something specific as it relates to technology. So I'm going to give you all the definitions that you need in the various courses. You don't need to master every single little nuance that's presented. Go for big picture ideas and then drill down, right? DHCP is used to give out IP addresses. If that's all you knew, you'd actually be at a really great starting place. And then you can add things into that. So with these IP addresses, they have a lease or, whatever it's going to be, but add in the extra information. Have those top level definitions. This is what it does. And then that's going to be a great place to start. And have fun with it. It's much easier to learn something fun than it is to learn something dry or boring. Don't be afraid to think, how does this relate to real life? Where have I seen this in real life? Nothing you're going to see is happening in a vacuum. It was all developed by human beings trying to create technology to serve the purposes of other human beings. They didn't just randomly pick words or make things work the way they did because it was arbitrary. They made it work the way we're familiar with how things work in real life. So I hope you're going to have a lot of fun. I certainly have had a ton of fun putting together this program for you. And I know you're going to be successful because I have faith in you. Have a fantastic time, and I'll see you in the first module. Welcome to Web Applications. I hope you're going to have a great time with this course. I certainly had a great time putting it together. So web applications are a collection of web pages that form an application. If you've ever been to any online retailer like Amazon, all of the web pages that show you goods that are for sale on Amazon, allow you to check out and buy them, that whole thing is a web application. In order to understand web applications, you're going to need to get familiar with the hypertext markup language, or HTML. And we're also going to be looking at cascading style sheets in this class, which allow us to apply formatting in an easy and convenient manner. So this course will start out in Module 1 with kind of an overview, right? So we'll look at, how do web servers work? What do markup languages do? How do they work? What about the evolution of web and mobile content? What tools should you use for creating HTML code and cascading style sheets? Some of the basic elements that need to go into a web page, and how you control text. We'll look at different aspects of text, look at lists, look at quotation marks, all kinds of fun stuff. Then you'll move into embedding and linking content. So you'll look at how to put images, video, and audio on a web page. And you'll talk about looking at tables, where you can create tables, kind of like something you see in Excel on the web page as well. Then we get into anchors. Those are the pieces that create the hyperlinks so that you can click and jump to a new document. We'll even look at how to take an image and make just parts of the image into hyperlinks that connect to different pages. Then we'll talk about forms. So how do you collect information from the person that's using your web application? And how do you make those look really cool and give them some guidance so they don't put in bad information? Then with Module 3, we're going to get into cascading style sheets, because that's where the real power of this is. So we're going to talk about, what is CSS? What are style rules? How do they work? We'll look at fonts, text properties, colors, formatting page elements. In Chapter 4, we'll start looking at the layout of the page as a whole. We'll talk about how to group content and what do we do when the content overflows the space that's been allocated. We'll even look at position and how items layer when you're talking about a web page. and ways to sort of break them out. We have a float property that lets you make pull quotes, things like that. In chapter 5, it's going to really ramp up. So now that you would have a basic understanding of CSS, we're going to get into advanced CSS selectors, really being very granular in how we can identify elements to receive the formatting, even if the only way to identify them is by virtue of the fact that the user did something, like they hover over something with their mouse, or they've already clicked a link, or they haven't clicked a link. Then we'll go in and look at how to make newspaper columns. We'll even create web pages that have a flexible layout where the items can move around on the page depending on how big the user gives the browser window. In chapter 6, we're going to get into advanced background and border techniques. So looking at using images for backgrounds, looking at changing the opacity of objects so that they might be a little bit see-through. We'll talk about gradients, which make some really neat images on the page. We'll get border images, how to make rounded corners on different boxes, and how to apply a shadow to boxes or text. And finally, in chapter 7, we're going to take a look at adding animation. So we'll look at being able to transform objects on the page, meaning have them change what they look like as the user is looking at the page, and even making some animations with transitions and keyframe animation. So I hope you enjoy this class. It's very unlikely that you're going to get a job where you're going to have to type HTML code from scratch. So why would we have this course in this track? Because if you are supporting web applications, you may need to look at the HTML code or the CSS code to figure out what's going wrong, right? It'd be very difficult to say, hey, this is what's going wrong if you don't understand how it works when it's going right. And plus, I think this is just such a fun class anyway. So enjoy this. Let your inner creativity out. I hope you go in. I hope you make a lovely website. Can't wait for you guys to get inside and really start digging in. Congratulations and welcome. In this demonstration, we want to take a look at web communication. So what is the World Wide Web anyway? With the World Wide Web, you go to a URL, which starts out with the protocol. Basic protocol for most web pages is either HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or Secure HTTP. So we start our URL with either HTTP or HTTPS. And I'm going to go to www.webserver.com, and a web page comes up. And I'm going to go to www.webserver.com, and a web page comes up. So what really happened? Well, when I put the address of the web server in, DNS resolves that to an IP address. And then the browser running on the client directs the request for a web page. A web page is just a document. So it asks the web server, can you give me a document? We're actually on the web server that has this web page. So let's see what actually happens. I'm going to go into my web server, which in Microsoft is IIS Manager. In Linux, it'd be Apache. And you can see inside of here, there's a default website. If I go into bindings, you can see that HTTP is bound to this website. So anything coming into HTTP, which is port 80, any IP address, is going to go to the default website. The default website has a directory associated with it. So if I go to the advanced settings, you can see that in this particular computer, it's the system drive, which is the C drive, inetpub www root. And then in that directory associated with the website, there's a default document. In this web server, it could be any of these. So first it looks for, maybe I could find default HTML, maybe I could find default ASP, index HTML, index HTML. So on this particular web server, if I go into the C drive, inetpub www root, it's finding this IIS start, which is the last one on the list. And so if I don't specify a particular document from this website, then what I get is the default document, and that's what's happening. If I want to replace that default document, I can do that. So let's go ahead and do that. So in this particular server, I have web pages here, and I've got a little document. And this document is called shad.html. And if I double click it, it looks like that. So let's go ahead and copy that and put it in that www root directory. I'm going to paste it in. But I still need to tell the web server which document to give. So I'm going to go back into my web server and add a default document, shad HTML. And now if we go in and we refresh our web page, you can see that's default document. So the web was invented to help people find documents. The person who invented the World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee, kind of felt like, hey, there's all these great documents out there, but we don't know how to get to them. So what's a way where we could find any document on any server and the World Wide Web is born? So when you open a web page, you're looking at a document, or it could be a series of documents, right? A lot of web pages have pictures in them, or they have movies embedded. If I go to Google, and then we pick any place on the page and right click and view the page source, we can see all the HTML code that's generating that web page. And we can see the title there. It's putting www.google.com on the tab. And as we looked in here, we would find other documents like the picture that says Google, that type of thing. So what you're going to be doing in this class is learning to create web pages. You'll be learning HTML, which is the code that displays information on the web page. And you'll be learning cascading style sheets, which is a way of controlling the formatting of web pages. So that's it for this demonstration. In this demonstration, we looked at web communication, how the browser requests the web page from the web server, and how the web server gives that web page back to the browser. In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at elements in HTML. So an element is a distinct object of an HTML document. We're going to be working with this document right here, shad.html, which is the default web page for the website running on this server. So we're going to pull up that web page. That's what it looks like right now. And then let's go ahead and edit with Notepad++. So we have two types of elements, empty or a container. A container element consists of data that's transformed by that element. And the content could be other elements, text, graphics, multimedia. But in HTML, the elements usually include three parts. So we're going to look at this line here. Welcome to my cool web page. And I don't know why it doesn't show my mouse pointer in Notepad++, but we'll figure it out. And you can see this little H1. So container elements start with an opening tag, which is just a less than symbol, the name of the element, and then a greater than symbol. So less than H1, which is heading 1, greater than symbol. In between is the content, and then it ends with a closing tag, which is this H1 at the end. So when you have a closing tag, it's going to be identical to the opening tag, except it's got this / here. And you can see as soon as I clicked in one of the H1s, Notepad++ puts them in purple because it knows those two things go together. An empty element contains no content. So if you look down here, we've got BR, that's a line break. It doesn't have a beginning and an end, right? I just want the line break to happen right there. And you can see it in the background on the website. This is my awesome website, line break. I hope you enjoy it, line break. And then we have the last line. Now, there's a little bit of difference between the line break on the I hope you enjoy it and the line break here. And that's because with empty elements, you can close it right in the opening tag because we don't need a closing tag. HTML5 does not require that you close it, but sometimes it's helpful to do that. So if you're going to close it right in the tag, you add the forward slash that is normally for the closing tag, but you add it at the end instead of adding it at the beginning. So it's a self-closing element. But you want to pay attention as you go through the course and just keep in your mind which elements require the opening tag, content in the middle, separate closing tag at the end, which ones are just empty. We can self-close them, or maybe we don't even have to close them at all. Now, in well-formed code, all the elements are properly nested. So nesting refers to a sort of parent-child relationship of elements in an HTML document. And I have an example down here, and I've actually done it wrong. So you can see the B that turns bold on, and then over here, you can see the /B that turns bold off. And then I have an I for italics, and I have the closing I. This is not well-formed code because it shouldn't be done like that. So you can think of elements that are nested as almost being like parentheses. So what I should have done is take that /I, so I'm going to delete that and put it here. So you want to make sure when you're nesting them, whichever one you open first is the last one that you close. Now, in this case, it still displayed the web page properly. I've got name in bold italics, but sometimes if you mess up the nesting, it's going to make a problem. And I think I can generate something like that here. I'm going to take the closing title tag and cut that and put it down here. I'll save my web page. And then you see up on the title is not right. I get that /head there. That's not what I want. Sometimes not properly nesting the elements will actually cause it to not display the web page. So make sure first to open, last to close. You want to close them in the order that you open them. Finally, we have different categories of HTML elements. So HTML elements are divided into two categories: structural elements and phase elements. Structural elements define the structure of the page. And with HTML5, they tried to make them more meaningful, like to have the name describe what they do. So you can see here, title is generating the title of the web page or what's happening up here in the tab. And I'm just going to save my web page and refresh it. We also have some areas that say head for the heading of the web page, body for the body of the web page. HTML says it's an HTML web page. So anything that governs the structure is a structural element. Phase elements are just intended to mark up specific words or phrases in the document text. So like H1, that's a phase element. Bold on, that's a phase element. You don't need that vocabulary, but that's another thing to kind of keep in mind when you're looking at the elements that we're going to see in this class. Which of them govern the structure of the web page and which of them actually affect the text? That's it for this demonstration on elements. In this demonstration, we looked at HTML elements. We talked about container elements and empty elements, opening tags and closing tags, and how to properly nest elements if we want well-formed code. We also talked a little bit about structural elements and phase elements. In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at beginning a new HTML page. So I'm here on my server, and I'm going to open Notepad+. And we've got a web page open from before, but I'm going to make a new document. So typically, we begin a new HTML document with a doc type declaration. That would be the first thing that appears in the document, and it defines the document's type just like it sounds like. So in HTML5, the doc type declaration is very simple. You don't even have to put a 5 in it. It just tells the computer, hey, this is going to be HTML5. And you start by putting a less than symbol, an exclamation mark, doc type, which I've always seen it always in uppercase, and then I can put in HTML. So including this doc type declaration is critical because it tells the browser what type of markup is used, and that affects how the browser displays the page. If you don't put it, it'll work. but some authoring tools will automatically put it in. And I'm just going to do a quick save. And I'll name this new page. And it's a little bit bizarre in Notepad++ because once Notepad++ knows that you're writing HTML, it'll try to help you out. So you see I've got doc type in there. If I type in H, T, it says, hey, maybe you want HTML. Now, these are all other types of doc types that you could have, but I can just double click it and it will put it in for me. So generally, HTML5 documents will have three basic structural elements: the HTML tag, the head tag, and the body tag. And those elements establish the framework for a web page. So the very first element that you want to put in is HTML. Even if I didn't have the doc type line, the computer would still know it's HTML because of the HTML tag. So you put in just literally HTML. And you see now that Notepad++ knows I'm working with HTML, it's suggesting that for me. So when you're doing the labs, if you're starting from scratch, you might want to just save it first, and then you can get the help from the drop-down combo box. Now remember, this is a container tag. Container tags always have to be started with the opening tag and ended with the closing tag. So I like to type my closing tag right off the bat. You can also hit tab, that'll take it, so that I don't forget to put the closing tag, because if you forget the closing tag, you'll be sad. HTML doesn't acknowledge any spaces, so I could have one space between these, I could have 10 spaces, it doesn't care. It also doesn't care about indenting. So you can keep everything on one level. A lot of people like to indent, make it easier to read. The second structural element that needs to be there is the head element that typically comes before the body. And it's just head. And I'm not going to use indenting here, so you can see it doesn't make a difference. And then again, I like to close the tags immediately so I don't forget to do it. So the head element is essential to HTML markup. You technically could leave it off and it would probably still work, but it's usually the first element we see in the file, and it has a lot of the important information that would define the document. None of the information that is between the head opening tag and closing tag is going to appear on the page in the browser. So typically we would see in here meta tags, which is metadata about the web page. We'll see that later on in this course. Character encoding, style sheets. The big thing that comes in here usually is the title, and that's the tag for it, is title. And then I'll close it because the title tag is a container tag. I'm just going to go in and double click this little web page that we've started. You can see there's the title up there, my neat web page, but there's nothing on the page. So that's what we mean when we say anything in the head element doesn't appear on the page. It might appear up in the title bar or in the tab, but it wouldn't appear on the actual page. Once you close out the head element, the other main element is the body element. And again, I like to close them right away just so I don't forget. And then anything in between here would be the body. So we'll just add a little text there, save it, go back into my browser and refresh. And there you can see the text on the web page. But those are the three main elements you would see in almost any HTML5 document: the HTML element, the HTML element, which is a container tag, the head element, and the body element. And you can kind of see I've been a little bit arbitrary. I put these main container elements, HTML, head, body, out on the left-hand side. Literally, the computer doesn't care where you put them as long as everything comes in the right order. So I could put that there, and let's just put a little enter in there, put a tab in there. What's important is the nesting. So remember, the first one to open is the last one to close. And we'll just go ahead and refresh. So other than spaces between words, the computer ignores all the spacing, tabs, line breaks. And in fact, if I wanted a line break, let me make my browser really small here. I come in here and refresh, you can see that's all on one line. So if we want a line break, we have to give it a code to give it a line break to say where we want that line break. Otherwise, it's just going to break wherever the browser thinks. I'm not sure if I can get it small enough. Let's just fudge it a little bit. I'm just going to copy this. You see Notepad++ isn't wrapping the lines. You can turn line wrap on, but you don't have to as well. Let's go ahead and rewind it. So you see the line break here is happening wherever the edge of the browser window is. If I want a particular line break, I would need to add that into the code. So that's it for this demonstration. The last thing I'm going to show you is how I would normally type the code, which you've seen in earlier videos. So I'm just going to go into this shad HTML. I like to indent like this so that you can see how things are moving, right? Like the head element is at the same level as body. And so indents can really help you structure the code so you can keep track of what's going on. What I love about Notepad Plus is that when you have these structural elements, you can sort of collapse them so you could just see one particular area. Like I just want to look at the head, or I just want to look at the body. And so that does make it easy to work with. So that's it for this demonstration. In this demonstration, we talked about beginning a new HTML page. We looked at the doc type string that tells the computer that it is HTML5. We looked at the HTML element, which should be really the beginning and end of any web page. The head element that contains information about the document. Anything in there is not going to appear on the page, but it may appear in the browser. And the body element that contains the page's content, everything that's going to be displayed. In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at some page elements. So we're going to take a look at 4 elements. The first one we're going to look at is the nav element. The nav element is used to define a page's navigation section, which typically contains links to other pages and resources on the website. So these are only links that are going to jump to either places on the page or other places in the website. And so since it will appear on the web page, we're going to put it inside of the body tag. I'm going to put my nav tag, and then we'll have a home menu, an about menu, and a contact menu. This is a container tag, so we need to close it. And then I'm going to save the web page. So if I refresh, you can see there's my sort of navigation section up at the top. It doesn't have links now because we haven't created any. Now I could do this just by putting text in there. The reason we put it in a navigational element is later on we're going to get some advantage when we get into cascading style sheets. Also, the element will allow users that are using alternative browsing devices like screen readers to sort of skip over the navigational information and go directly to the page content. You're probably a little miffed, I am, that these two things appear right next to each other. To get them separated, you would have to add some line break. And you could put the nav element like this, where I've got nav and then end nav. Or you could do something like this, which many people like to do. It just depends. Notepad doesn't care where you put spaces or anything like that. You can add as much spaces in as you want. And you can see when I put the spaces in, if I refresh, it doesn't make a darn bit of difference. And what I will do here is add in some line breaks. And I'm just going to copy. Copy is Control-C on the keyboard. If you're not used to keyboard shortcuts, it's really helpful. And now if I go refresh my web page, that just dropped it down about 3 lines. The next page element we're going to look at is the footer element. And so this would define things that happen at the bottom of the web page. We use the footer tag to open it. It is a container tag. And often you would see like a copyright notice or something like that inside the footer. So if I go and refresh, right now it appears directly at the bottom. But again, by setting that text aside, we'll gain some flexibility when we get to formatting much later in the course. Just going to go in and add some line breaks. It drives me nuts when everything is all next to each other. So I'm going to copy my line breaks. We'll save that and refresh. And that drops it down a little bit. Third page element we're going to look at is the section element. So the section element is meant to define document sections. It's used to group content into sort of logical and distinct sections, kind of like if they were chapters in a book. So for an example, maybe you wanted to divide your web page into history, news, and reviews. The section element has meaning to HTML. It's not something we see on the page. So when we add the section element here, we're not going to see much, but I am going to go and grab some extra text. If this is driving you nuts, I've got a lot of text here. It's all in one line. You can go up under View and turn on Word Wrap, and it'll wrap it around and keep it so you can see everything. But you can tell it's one line because in Notepad++, you have line numbers. So this is all line 1. Even though it wrapped, we can see it's not a different line. I didn't hit enter. There was no line break. So I'm just going to highlight that all. It's Control A to highlight everything or all. Control C to copy. And then I'm going to use a Control V to paste. And we'll go get some line breaks for that as well. So maybe I say, well, maybe that first line is a section, and then this new text I brought in is a different section. So I can add some section elements to help me out. And it's really just section. There's the opening element. I'm going to indent to make it a little more readable. And then I'll add my section closing element. And then this will be another section. And then I'm going to go to the end and put my section closing tag. And then I'll just go up and indent this to keep it nice and easy to read. So if I refresh, we're not going to see anything on the page. It's really just for organization purposes. Again, later when we get into cascading style sheets, we'll actually be able to use the section tags to control how the document works. But right now, you're probably not going to see any advantage to adding section. It's just extra work. Why would I want to work extra? I am totally in touch with that. The last page element we're going to talk about are comments. So comments are notes the programmer puts in to themselves. So right now, this is a pretty straightforward little web page, right? I can read this pretty easily, but most web pages have a lot of code in them. If I go out to Google and I look at the source code, who wants to read that? And even if I'm the programmer, I might go, well, I don't remember what this little piece here does. So you can add comments to help yourself remember, what you were doing. And maybe it might identify who did this, people who might fix it after you're gone. So I'm going to add a comment right up here. So comments in HTML start with a less than symbol, an exclamation mark, and 2 double dashes. And you can see as soon as I type that, it turns everything green. So in Notepad++, comments are displayed in green. And the reason it's turned everything green is because I haven't finished my comment. So this is literally saying everything after this is a comment. And what's odd is that's the opening comment tag, but there's no greater than symbol to finish it. So let me add my comment. And then the closing tag is -- greater than. And you can do it this way all on one line. Or if you wanted to, you can do it similar to what we've been doing before, where you do it like this. Either way will work fine. Once you've typed this less than symbol, exclamation mark, -- everything thereafter until it hits the closing is considered a comment. So let's just go back and refresh our web page. Comments do not appear on the web page. They're literally just for the programmer. However, if I go in and I look at the page source, they do appear in the page source. So never put in the comment something that you don't want the world to see. That's a great way for hackers to find out information. They can go and look at the page source. If somebody left something in there that wasn't supposed to be there, you can see it right in the page source. So good way to remind yourself of what's going on, but either don't put anything in the comments you don't want the world to see, or take them out before you publish the web page. So that's it for this demonstration. In this demonstration, we looked at page elements. We looked at the nav element that we use to define the navigation area. We looked at the footer element that we use to define the footer area. We looked at the section element where we can define sections that we'll use later in the course. And we looked at how to add comments to HTML code. In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at controlling text. We want to go through a bunch of different elements that we can use for formatting. First one we're going to look at is the paragraph symbol. So up until now, we've been using the break symbol, this BR, to break a line. But you can also use a paragraph symbol to break a line as well. The difference is this. If I go into my browser, let's refresh, you can see where I added a line break. Let's see if I can arrange them a little bit. So we've got line breaks all the way down to the paragraph where it says if I want a new paragraph and not just a line break. You can see when you break a line, it starts the next line right away. It's literally a line break. If you're in a word processor, you would do Shift Enter. You break the line, but you don't start a new paragraph. When you use the paragraph symbol, which I did at the end of this sentence right here, not only does it end the line, but it starts the next line a little bit down to show that it's a different paragraph. So you can use either one. I don't use the break very much because usually I don't care where the line breaks. I want the browser to figure out where to break the line depending on how big the window is. But if you do, you can use break. Otherwise, you can use P for new paragraph. We also want to look at some formatting elements. So I've got that on this page as well. And you can see sort of this line. Sometimes I want some bold text. And we've already looked at the bold tag, which is just a B. It's a container tag. So there's the opening tag for bold. There's the closing tag for bold. Now they do have a tag called strong. So you can use strong as well. I haven't seen that used very much, but you notice if it says strong, it just puts it in bold. So whatever you like best, you can. Italics we've also seen before in some of the earlier videos. So if we look down in this sort of next line here, we know italics is the I tag. Anything in between the opening italics tag and the closing italics tag is going to be in italics. Or there's an emphasis tag, which effectively puts it in italics as well. But theoretically, emphasis would tell the person that you want to emphasize it. Italics is just italics. I think it's a stylistic thing. It's not going to make a difference how it displays. Emphasis is like strong. It's not used very often, but you can certainly use it if you want to. In terms of starting out and making different text, we have different levels of headings. So there are 6 levels of headings. Headings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And they are exactly what you might think they are. H1 is the opening tag for heading 1. And then we have the closing tag for heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4, heading 5, and heading 6. Sometimes you need to display special characters on the page, and they call those character entities. So this R inside a circle for registered trademarks, or the little TM if it's a trademark, the C inside of a circle for copyright. Those are kind of made in similar ways. So for the registered trademark, you put an ampersand reg and then a semicolon. So they all start with an ampersand, which is Shift 7 on a US keyboard, and they end with a semicolon. And you can see trademark is just ampersand trade with a semicolon. Copyright is ampersand copy with a semicolon. For the pseudo recipe I have here, if you want to do a fraction, you can do an ampersand frac. The first number is whatever comes in front of the /. The second number is what comes after it. So this is 1/4. This is the 3/4 there. And the last character entity that might not be obvious is this one down here, NBSP, for no break space. So when you put this one in, it makes a space between the 2 words, but it tells the browser not to create a line break there. And if you look, this is the second instance of 2 words in this paragraph. So in the first line, I have 2 words. That's fine to break that. But at the end of that first sentence, those two words, it shouldn't break the line in between them. And we can sort of see this. I don't think I can get it small enough to break between the first two words, but as I get out, so I go out a little bit more, it didn't just bring the two up there because the whole two words has to come. And then it brings the whole thing up. So it just says don't break between these two words. So sometimes you want to make sure that regardless of how they resize the window, those words are going to be together, but you do need a space in between them. Then you can have a no break space. And we'll see other things that come up, like you can put quotes in, which you can probably guess is ampersand, QOT, and a semicolon. There's lots of little special characters, but it's all the same thing. It's an ampersand, whatever the code is for that, and then it ends with a semicolon. The last one that we're going to look at are heading groups. And these, it might be a little tough to understand. Why would I want this? But when you have two levels of headings together, so for example, at the top of this page, I have H1 and H2. And you probably notice on character entities, on headings, I didn't bother to put the doc type string. I didn't put HTML. I didn't put body. It still displayed it okay. That's fine for a demo like this where I don't need to be typing a lot of code. For an actual web page, all those elements that we talked about in the previous lesson really need to be on the page. Just because it's working in the demo doesn't mean you don't need to type them. But if I want to sort of group these headings together, I can use an H group element. And then at the end, I'll turn H group off. And that tells the browser that these headings are grouped together. So let's say you had a magazine article with a title and a subtitle. You might put the headings in a group, and then you could use that later on when we get to cascading style sheets to format any group like that. So if you were, let's say, administering the website for a magazine that has, 50 pages of magazine articles, if you put all the title and subtitles in a heading group, later on, you'll be able to change all of the heading groups on all of the web pages just by making a small number of pages. So this is kind of like that section tag. And let me save it and just refresh. You're not going to see anything on the page. And right now you're going to feel like, why would I be typing extra code? I don't need that. It's because later on, grouping things together will give us a lot of power when it comes to formatting. So whenever there are things that should be grouped together, it's worth it to just take an extra minute or two, put an element in there that groups them, because later on we'll be able to leverage that when it comes to formatting. So that's it for this demonstration on controlling text in HTML. We looked at headings, controlling the actual text, making things bold, making things italics, the difference between line breaks and paragraph breaks, all the different layers of headings, character entities, and heading groups. In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at HTML lists. So I'm still working with my little neat web page, but I've changed it up a bit. And you can see up here, I have this statement, what I love about HTML, and then I have some bullets. So bullets are a list of items where the order of the list is not important, right? I could say it makes me look smarter and then say it's easy to learn. It's not going to change what I'm trying to communicate. Then I've got this little, if you want to create a web page, step 1, open a text editor. Step 2, type some HTML code. Now there, with numbers, the order is important, right? I can't type some HTML code and then open a text editor. So when the order is important, we tend to use numbers and then put them in order. And then down here, I kind of mixed it up together, right? Step number 1, open a text editor. But then I've got some bullets here because it doesn't matter which order those are in. So let's take a look at the code that's generating this web page. So I've kind of collapsed. I've used sections to separate out the list so I can collapse them. So this is just those bullets, what I love about HTML. So when it's bullets, it's an unordered list. And the tag is UL, literally for unordered list. And that begins and ends the entire list. And then for each item in the list, you use LI, which stands for list item. So my first list item is it's easy to learn. My second list item is it makes me look smarter than I am. And the browser knows that it's bullets because of the UL tag. Now, numbers are going to be very, very similar, really identical, except for the fact that numbers have a specific order, right? So it kind of makes sense that the element for numbers is OL, or ordered list, for things that follow a sort of sequence or hierarchy. But then for the elements in that list, we still use the list item element, just like we did with bullets. And then if you want to mix it up, you can nest these things. So this last piece over here, let's look deeper into that. Open a text editor. Well, I have my ordered list because the biggest thing here is number 1. There's the tag that's the ordered list. And then I have my first list item on the ordered list, which is open a text editor. And here's why when you're indenting, it makes it easier to read. I could have typed everything in this document on the left margin, but it's a little easier to see that underneath that first list item in the ordered list, I have an entire unordered list or set of bullets with 2 list items. So then I go back, I get my next list item in the ordered list, type some HTML code, and then I have another full unordered list or bullets that appear under that. So, and then finally, we close the ordered list. This, I think, is a really good example of why nesting is so important to make sure you do it properly. And it's easier in something like this if you do the indents. But I open my ordered list up here in line 28. It doesn't close until line 39. But then within the list items, I open an unordered list and then close it before moving to the next list item in the ordered list. So you can mix it up however you want. You just have to be really careful with the nesting because sometimes it gets confusing, particularly because it's list item, whether it's an ordered list or an unordered list. So sometimes you just glance and I tend to forget, which one am I working on? So that's it for this demonstration. In this demonstration, we looked at ordered lists or numbers, unordered lists or bullets, the list item element that encloses each list item. Now, if you look at my code, I did purposely make one mistake. And if you can see it, you might want to pause the video and see if you can look for it. But it's in this second item of the second unordered list, really here in line 37. So if you notice, I didn't close the list item element. List item can be used as if it's an empty tag because it does sort of just happen. But technically, it can be also be used as a container. And that's probably better form or better formed code if you put the closing tag. But you'll notice I didn't have that closing tag when I refreshed the page and everything worked just fine. So that's it for this demonstration. In this demonstration, we looked at unordered lists or bullets, ordered lists or numbers, the list item element that encloses a list item, although it can be used as if it's an empty tag, and then even an example of how to nest lists. In this demonstration, we're going to talk about HTML attributes. Attributes provide information about elements. So if you think back to operating systems, when we worked with commands, we used options, or you might call them switches, to change how the command functioned. Right? So we did an ls to list the directory contents, and we added the -a to list all of the directory contents, including the hidden ones. Attributes are like that. So they change the way the element works. They're specified within the tag, after the tag name, and it's always the name of the attribute equals, and then the value, and we put the value in quotes. So some attributes are exclusive to certain elements, whereas other attributes are global and they can be used anywhere. So let's take a look. I've working with this pretty much the similar or same web page we've been working with for most of the videos, but I've made some changes to it. So if you look up here in the HTML element, I've added lang for language equals and en for English. So language is a global attribute. Any element can use the language attribute and you specify the name of the language. En for English, if we go down here, I added it to the italics. I put in FR for French, ES for Spanish, DE for German. I'm sorry I can't do every language, but you kind of get the idea there. Another global attribute is the class attribute. So the class attribute is used to sort of tie things together into a particular class. So we had talked about using sections to tie different sections or different parts of the page together. We saw H group to tie heading groups together. We saw the nav section to tie all the nav elements together, footer together. So here I've added some class attributes. So I have, for example, on bold, I added class equals fraction in front of this fraction, and same thing down here in front of this fraction. Now we do have some bold that's not part of a fraction, or if we don't, we'll add some. In fact, let's just do that right now. We'll add some bold here and turn it off. I'm going to save that. But you can add the class attribute to anything. And the value for that is just a name you make up to tie things together. So here, where I've got class equals fraction, I'm tying that one together with this other class equals fraction right there. But then the bold that we just added is not tied into that, right? Another one that you can use in pretty much any element would be ID. So if you've looked, I've done that for some of my sections. So I've given it ID. This one is list 1, and I actually also gave it the class big. This one is list 2. That's also the class big. So ID and class function very similarly. The idea is that when you use ID, it's going to be the only one on a page. Like list 1 should be the only one. Whereas class, you can use it in many different places to tie things together. I think those are all the attributes I used. Now, we're going to get into cascading style sheets much, much later, but I just want to show you the power of this. But first, I'm going to go ahead and refresh. You can kind of tell that HTML got bigger, but we can barely tell that my fractions are bold, right? But look what happens when I want to add some styles. So I actually have copied the styles that I want over here. I'm not going to make you watch me type. So I'm going to go back into new page, and I'm going to put that in. I'm going to put it right under body here. So what I've done is I've said, look, anything that's of the class fraction, I want you to increase the font size to 200%. Anything that's got an ID of list 1, I want the color for that to be red. And anything that's of a class big, I want the font size to be 150% of what it is. So look what happens when I refresh my page. So my fractions got very big, but, well, HTML also got big because it was part of big, but it shouldn't have affected HTML. It's still smaller. And in fact, what we can kind of do is just switch it a little bit. I'm going to take away that class, and I'll just change my style here to affect list 2. There you go. That makes it a little easier. So even though HTML was bold, because it wasn't of the class fraction, it didn't get the increase. So I was able to tie those two fractions together. And you can start to see the power with cascading style sheets, right? Once I start tying things together, I can deal with those things as a unit rather than having to go back, oh no, the boss said I have to increase the size of every fraction across the website. If you've consistently used class and you're using cascading style sheets, it's very simple. You change one line, everything across the whole website changes. If you haven't put that code in to tie things together, then you're going to be out of luck. And so that's why we're using elements like section, and we can start adding attributes like class, and that's where the power of that will come in. So that's really it for this demonstration on attributes. Attributes are additional information that you can add to an element. You add it after the name of the element. You put the name of the attribute equals, and then you put the value of the attribute in quotes. And then some attributes can be used with everything. They're global attributes, and those specifically are language, class, and ID. Other attributes might be specific to particular elements. In this demonstration, we're going to look at quotation marks. So I've done some modifying to my neat little web page here, and currently this is what it looks like. So my grandmother always told me, live and learn, that's in quotation marks. There's some introductory sentences, and then I have a long quote, and then finally I have the word smart in quotes. And these were all done 3 different ways. So let's take a look at the code. When you have a quote, you can use the quote element, which is a container tag. So I've done that with my quote from Grandma. So right in front of live and learn, I've got Q for quote. That's the quote element. And then after the quote, I close the quote element. That's used for what they call an inline quotation, meaning we're not going to have any line breaks. We're not going to have any indentations. We're just going to put quotes around this. So where the opening quote element is, it'll put open quotes. Where the closing quote element is, it'll put close quotes, just like you see on the web page. Live and learn right up there. When you have a long quote, you are supposed to indent it on both sides, kind of like you see with this long paragraph here. And so in HTML, that's called a block quote, and it uses the block quote tag. So you can see right here, I have the opening block quote tag, and then at the end, I have the closing block quote tag. Now, both quote, just the lower Q, and the block quote can take a site. And for site, you would give the URL of where you got the quote. And so you can kind of see in here, I've got the URL of where I pulled up that quote. It doesn't show in the web page, but if somebody wanted to see where I found it, then they would be able to look. Now, if you don't like the quote element, like I used around Grandma's words of wisdom here, you can just use a character entity. So I've got ampersand QOT for quote. I end it with my semicolon. There's the word smart, and then there's another quote. But you don't want to use both of them together, right? So there's that word smart down here, which is in quotes. Look what happens if I wasn't thinking. I thought, well, this is a quote. I'm just telling you that it's a quote from Grandma. So I'm just going to go here and I'm going to add, and quote. You save that. I'm going to refresh. I got 2 quotes. And notice when I use the Q, it kind of makes the quotes open and close, right? So let's just reverse that. See how they sort of curve to the left and curve to the right? Whereas when I use the character entity, they're just sort of straight up and down. Now, sometimes you want straight up and down, sometimes you want them to curve a little bit. Hey, that's your style, but that's sort of the difference. So that's it for this demonstration. In this demonstration, we looked at quotation marks. We looked at using the quote element for inline quotes. We looked at using the block quote element to make a block quote, which is going to be indented and set off. You can see it change the paragraph. And we looked at the character entity quote, which just puts a quotation mark wherever you put the character entity. And remember, both the block quote and the quote elements can take a site where I would list the URL of wherever I got the information. You're already at the end of the first module. In this module, we start out by taking a look at how web servers work. So web pages are transferred using HTTP, which is not an encrypted protocol. It's not secure, and HTTPS, which is an encrypted protocol, and it is secure. So that request comes into the web server. The web server checks the right directory, finds the page, and returns the web page to the user's browser. We talked about markup languages and what makes HTML, which is the main language of the World Wide Web, so unique. And of course, that's the fact that it supports hyperlinks that allow you to call up another document just by clicking the link. I'm sure you knew that already, but sometimes we know things without thinking about how they work. And that's what you need to be thinking about for this course. This course is really going to be about learning HTML and CSS, or cascading style sheets, which is a coding language used to control the visual styles of web pages. We got some guidelines for authoring compliant HTML that's going to work in the maximum number of browsers, right? And we talked about development tools. Essentially, with HTML, we are providing the markup language ourselves. That's why we can't write HTML code in any word processor, because word processors have their own markup language. And in fact, it's actually pretty similar to HTML, but it's in the background. Then we really dug into getting started with a basic web page. We talked about container tags and empty tags, right? Container tags have an opening tag and a corresponding closing tag, which is almost just like the opening tag, except right after the less than symbol, we have that / that makes it a closing tag. Empty tags just kind of create an effect wherever they happen, like the break tag causes a line break at that point. And we're going to see a number of tags that can be treated as either container tags or empty tags, like the paragraph tag or list item. And there are pros and cons to playing them either way. So a really important part of that lesson was nesting tags. Remember, first to open, last to close. And it might seem really simple, but it's really important, because if you don't have the tags properly nested, you're not going to see the results that you want in the browser. You want to be just as careful with nesting tags as you were with tracking parentheses when you learn math. So we talked about sections and we even explored comments, which aren't rendered on the page but can be helpful. We also learned about the parts of an HTML page. So the head section contains information about the document. Items in the head element don't appear in the browser except for the title, which puts the wording on the tab of the browser. We also learned about the body element that contains most of the code on a web page, and the footer element that can contain information intended for the bottom of the page. We took some time to talk about controlling text, so we found out how to make words bold or italics. And we discussed character entities, which are a way of expressing a character that might normally be part of the HTML code or might be hard to type out, like the copyright symbol or even the non breaking space that tells the browser not to put a line break between two words. We learned that all of the character entities start with the and symbol and end with a semicolon. So, for example, if we wanted a non breaking space, that would be and NBSP semicolon. Then we took a look at lists. So we have unordered lists, which are bullets, and we have ordered lists, which are numbers because there is an order to it. And those tags are pretty easy, right? Unordered list is UL, ordered list is OL. And then for the items in the list, regardless of what kind you choose, it's line item or LI tag. And that can be empty, or we can put an opening tag in front of the list item and a closing tag behind it. Another tag that can be either empty or a container, of course, is the paragraph tag, which is just a P. Paragraphs always start on a new line. And the big difference between those and the break is that a paragraph symbol adds a little space between it and the paragraph above. Then we dug into attributes. So attributes are extra information that we can put in the opening tag. We learned that there are some attributes that are global, such as the lang tag for language. The two important ones we want to keep our eye on are class, which is a way of tying together multiple different types of tags. So we can add something in as a class. There could be more than one thing that has that class. And we learned about the ID tag, which needs to be unique on the page. It uniquely identifies that particular element. Then we talked about quotation marks, right? So we can use the quote character entity, but that's just going to give us straight quotes. If we want those sort of fancy smart quotes that kind of curve in towards the text, we want to do an inline quote, then we're going to use the quote container tag, which is just the Q. And if we want to quote a lot of text and have it offset, like indented on both sides, we would use a block quote. And it's always good when you're quoting something to tell people where you got it. So we looked at the cite attribute, CITE, where we can put a URL to show where we got the quote. So, wow, that's a lot for one little module. I hope it makes sense. If it doesn't now, it will soon. I've always loved HTML. It's a good first programming language. And if I can make things happen on the screen, it always makes me feel smarter than I probably am. I just love it. I can type some code, suddenly something appears in the browser. I don't know. It's very satisfying. So I know you're going to do great in the graded assessment, and I can't wait for you to start the next module.